The moment Jade Washington's Japanese words filled the room, power shifted like gravity itself had changed direction. Theodore Vance's crystal glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against Italian marble with a sound that echoed like truth breaking through lies. $700 million evaporated in an instant. "You have no idea what you've just done," Theodore whispered, his face draining of color as he gripped the edge of the table. But Jade knew exactly what she'd done. 20 minutes ago, she'd been invisible. Just another black waitress at the Pinnacle Hotel's exclusive obsidian room, refilling water glasses and disappearing between courses. Now every eye in the room was fixed on her as she continued speaking perfect, formal Japanese to Billionaire tech CEO Akiko Nakamura. The executives from Tech Fusion Global sat frozen, sweat beading on foreheads, as their carefully orchestrated deception collapsed around them. They had assumed the language barrier was their shield. They had been wrong. Akiko hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, her composure perfect as always. But something had changed in her eyes as she watched Jade translate the hidden contract clause that would have stripped her company of its revolutionary patents. Recognition, respect, and something else, a gleam of justice long awaited. Vincent Palmer, Tech Fusion's CFO, lunged for his tablet, desperately trying to close the document. Too late. The truth was already echoing off the hand-painted ceiling, bouncing between crystal chandeliers, impossible to contain. How had it come to this moment? How had they so catastrophically underestimated the woman who had been silently pouring their wine? And what would happen now that Jade Washington had thrown away her job, her security, everything, for a stranger's dignity? The answer would change both women's lives forever. This story isn't just about a business deal gone wrong. It's about what happens when society underestimates the wrong people. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced, this one's for you. Subscribe now because we're just getting started with stories that need to be told. 3 hours earlier, Jade had arrived at the service entrance of the Pinnacle Hotel with the weight of unpaid bills pressing down on her shoulders. 3 hours earlier, Jade had arrived at the service entrance of the Pinnacle Hotel with the weight of unpaid bills pressing down on her shoulders. She sat alone in the staff locker room, counting yesterday's tips, $17.35, not even enough for her art supplies, let alone this month's tuition installment. 3 more shifts until the payment deadline. 3 more nights of perfect smiles, perfect posture, perfect invisibility. Washington. Ryan Phillips's voice cut through her calculations. The floor manager stood in the doorway, clipboard pressed to his chest like armor. "You're on the Obsidian room tonight. Big deal going down. Tech Fusion Global and some Japanese tech company. $700 million acquisition." Jade nodded, tucking the small stack of bills into her wallet. "Yes, sir. These people won't see you, and that's exactly how we want it." Ryan's voice softened to the tone he used when explaining things he believed were beyond her comprehension. These executives need to feel like their wine glasses fill themselves, like their plates appear and disappear by magic. You don't exist tonight, not as a person. You're a function. Understand? Something flickered behind Jade's eyes. A small flame of resistance quickly banked. "Perfectly." Ryan smiled thinly. "Good. Service corridor only. No lingering. No eye contact." As he walked away, Jade opened her locker and removed her crisp white shirt and black vest. She'd heard this speech before. Every high-end restaurant, every exclusive club, every wealthy home she'd ever worked in, they all wanted the same thing. The physical presence of service without the uncomfortable reminder of the human providing it. As she buttoned her collar, a memory washed over her, sudden and vivid. 10-year-old Jade sitting in a classroom in Tokyo's Setagaya district, her laughter blending with her classmates as they practiced calligraphy. the teacher praising her brushwork, calling it thoughtful, like your soul is speaking through the ink. The other children crowding around her desk, admiring without a hint of surprise that this black American girl could move her brush with such fluidity, could speak their language with such natural grace. Jade Chan, they called her. Never foreign, never other, just Jade. For 8 years, Tokyo had been home, her diplomat father and mother raising her in a world where her bilingual skills were celebrated, not hidden. Where intelligence in a young black girl was expected, not exceptional. Jade pulled her hair back into a tight bun, regulation style. In the staff bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection as she applied the minimal makeup allowed by hotel policy. With each stroke of mascara, each dab of muted lipstick, she tucked away another piece of herself. The art student with paint-stained fingernails disappeared. The woman who could discuss Japanese literature in its original language vanished. The daughter of diplomats who'd negotiated international treaties faded away. What remained was what the Pinnacle Hotel wanted, a silent, efficient shadow. A function, not a person. She straightened her vest, checking that her name tag was perfectly centered. Jade W. Just enough identification to satisfy labor laws, not enough to suggest individuality. As she walked toward the service elevator, she passed 2 other servers who would join her upstairs. Heard it's tech fusion tonight, one whispered. They're buying out some Japanese company. Woman CEO who barely speaks English. Should be straightforward. Jade's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the small notepad in her pocket. The executives believed they saw everything worth seeing in that dining room. But the most dangerous person at the table wasn't sitting down. She was pouring their water. And she understood every word. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who never bothered to see your true value? Share your story with us, because being underestimated might just be your greatest weapon. The obsidian room hummed with artificial warmth as Theodore Vance and his executive team claimed their territory. They spread documents across the table, laughed too loudly, clasped each other's shoulders, men performing power for an audience of themselves. Vincent Palmer, the CFO, kept checking his Patek Philippe watch between rehearsed jokes. Jade moved around them like water, arranging crystal glasses, straightening silver, maintaining the required distance. Invisible. She's late, Vincent muttered, glancing again at his watch. Theodore loosened his tie slightly. Cultural difference. They're never on time in Japan. Jade's eyes flickered, a small tell she immediately suppressed. Another assumption. Another mistake. In her experience, Japanese business leaders were pathologically punctual. The double doors opened precisely at 7. No fanfare, no announcement. Just 2 people entering a room. Akiko Nakamura stood 5'4" in modest heels, her silver-streaked black hair cut in a simple bob that framed a face unmarked by cosmetics or unnecessary expression. Her charcoal suit was expertly tailored but intentionally understated. Nothing about her screamed billionaire, and that was precisely the point. Real power rarely advertised itself. Behind her stood Hiroshi Tanaka, her interpreter, tall, middle-aged, face professionally neutral. The room's energy shifted instantly. The executives straightened, their performed casualness replaced with something more attentive, more predatory. Ms. Nakamura. Theodore stepped forward, hand extended. He spoke at an unnecessary volume, as if increased decibels might bridge the language gap. "Wel come to San Francisco." Akiko accepted his handshake with a precise, practiced motion. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, scanned each face in the room briefly before settling back on Theodore. She bowed slightly, speaking a few measured sentences in Japanese. Hiroshi translated, Ms. Nakamura thanks you for your hospitality and looks forward to our discussion. Theodore guided her to the table with a hand hovering near her elbow but not quite touching, somewhere between chivalry and herding. We have prepared an excellent meal. Please, Saiti. Jade moved forward with water for the new arrivals. As she leaned between them, Akiko's fingertips traced the edge of the contract tablet. Her nails, unpolished, precisely trimmed, tapped once, twice, 3 times. Jade recognized that gesture from her years in Tokyo. It wasn't impatience. It was calculation. For a fraction of a second, Jade's movement faltered. Akiko glanced up, their eyes meeting momentarily. Something passed between them, a current of recognition so brief yet so complete that Jade felt her chest tighten. Then Akiko's gaze moved away, her face once again composed and unreadable. We've simplified the contract considerably, Vincent said, tapping his own tablet. Nothing complicated. Very straightforward acquisition terms. Hiroshi translated. Akiko nodded, her expression revealing nothing. We know how difficult these technical terms can be, Theodore added, waving his hand dismissively. Especially across languages. The men exchanged small smiles, confident in their position, their control. They didn't notice how Akiko's eyes lingered for a millisecond on certain contract clauses. They didn't see how her posture shifted almost imperceptibly when specific terms were mentioned. But Jade noticed. Because Jade knew what it was like to be underestimated. To have people look at you and see only what they expected to see. As she retreated to her position along the wall, Jade felt a strange kinship with the billionaire. 2 women, worlds apart, yet sharing the same invisible cloak, one of prejudice, one of choice. Both watching, both waiting. The men had set their trap, and they were certain of their prey, unaware that they had invited not 1, but 2 predators to dinner. The appetizers arrived, delicate portions of seared scallops for the executives, a traditional vegetable dish for Akiko. As Jade cleared the empty plates, she noticed how conversation had shifted. Numbers and projections flowed around Akiko, translated by Hiroshi in careful, measured tones. But there was something in the rhythm, a deliberate acceleration when complex terms arose, allowing minimal time for true comprehension. Now, the intellectual property transfer, Theodore said, tapping his tablet. Standard acquisition procedure. Vincent smiled as Hiroshi translated. Your neural interface algorithms will integrate seamlessly with our existing systems. What they didn't say, what the simplified translation obscured, was that integration meant complete absorption, transfer of ownership, extraction of the very innovation that had made quantum neural worth acquiring in the first place. As the main course arrived, Jade moved to pour wine. Theodore leaned closer to Vincent, their voices dropping as Akiko studied the contract on her tablet. Section 7.4 is the golden ticket, Theodore whispered. Full patent transfer with no royalty structure. Vincent nodded, his lips barely moving. She has no idea what she's actually signing. The translation Hiroshi's giving her conveniently omits the part about losing control of her core technology. Once we have the neural algorithms, we don't need her anymore, Theodore added. We'll keep her on as figurehead for a year, good optics for the Asian market, then phase her out completely. Jade's hand trembled slightly as she poured Cabernet into Vincent's glass. A drop escaped, landing on the white tablecloth like blood. Neither man noticed. They were too busy congratulating themselves on their cleverness, their strategic brilliance. The tablet between them displayed the contract briefly, Section 7.4 highlighted in yellow. Full and complete transfer of all intellectual property rights, patents pending, and research developments related to neural interface technology. Jade's eyes flickered to Akiko. The billionaire appeared absorbed in her meal, nodding politely as Hiroshi continued his filtered translations. But there was tension in her shoulders, a slight tightness around her eyes. "Your company's brand identity will remain intact," Theodore said loudly, "for Akiko's benefit." Then, under his breath to Vincent, "For exactly 12 months, until we've extracted everything valuable." Vincent suppressed a chuckle, raising his newly filled glass. "To mutually beneficial partnerships." As glasses clinked, Jade moved to refill Akiko's water. For one unguarded moment, she saw the woman's expression. Not confusion or ignorance, but something harder, colder, more calculating. Their eyes met again, brief but electric. A current of understanding passed between them. Akiko's fingertips drummed once, twice, 3 times against the table edge. Jade stepped back against the wall, her mind racing. She'd worked enough high-end events to recognize predatory business tactics. But this was different. This was destruction disguised as partnership. Theft masked as merger. The contract would erase Akiko's life's work. Her innovation. Her legacy. In business, they call it asymmetric information, when one party knows more than the other. But in real life, we call it something else. Deception. And tonight, the deceiver didn't realize he was being watched. Jade glanced at her watch. 2 hours until signing. 2 hours to decide if this was her problem. 2 hours to weigh her job, her tuition, her future against a stranger's company, no matter how unjust the situation. But something in Akiko's careful composure, in the dignity with which she faced men who thought her incapable of understanding them, struck a chord deep within Jade. How many times had she stood silent while others underestimated her? How many times had she swallowed her words, her knowledge, her truth? As dessert menus appeared, the weight of silent witness became suddenly, unbearably heavy. Have you ever watched someone being deceived, knowing you could speak up but fearing the cost? That moment when your conscience and your self-preservation go to war? Tell us about a time you had to choose between comfortable silence and costly truth. Dessert arrived, delicate chocolate structures that seemed too artful to consume. Conversation had shifted to post-acquisition plans, and with each passing minute, Theodore's facade of respect grew thinner. The wine had loosened tongues, inflated egos, and eroded whatever professional restraint had existed at the start of the evening. "The transition period will be smooth," Theodore explained, gesturing with his dessert fork. "We'll have a PR campaign celebrating the cultural diversity of our expanded company." Hiroshi translated, his voice steady and professional. Vincent added, "And of course, Ms. Nakamura will maintain her position as the public face of Quantum Neural during the integration phase." Akiko nodded, her expression neutral as she listened to the translation. She responded in Japanese, her words flowing with careful precision. "Ms. Nakamura expresses gratitude for your consideration of her continued involvement," Hiroshi translated. Theodore smiled, a tight, impatient expression that didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Very important to have Japanese representation. As Jade refilled water glasses, Theodore leaned toward Vincent again, lowering his voice to what he believed was a confidential volume. "Look, we're not buying her company for her," he said, swirling the last of his wine. "Once we have the patents, she becomes decorative, like a bonsai tree in the lobby. Useful for photos, nothing more." Vincent chuckled. "Perfect analogy. Small, exotic, and doesn't speak unless we want it to." Jade's knuckles turned white around the water pitcher. Her breath caught, held. Hiroshi stiffened almost imperceptibly. His eyes flicked toward Akiko, then back to his notepad. He translated nothing of the exchange. But something shifted in Akiko's posture, a momentary rigidity that passed through her like an electric current. Her eyes, focused on her dessert, widened fractionally. A flash of comprehension, followed by a deeper emotion, hurt, perhaps, or anger, before her features settled once more into careful neutrality. She had understood. Despite Hiroshi's protective silence, despite the executive's assumption of language barrier, she had caught enough to know exactly how they viewed her. Not as an equal, not as an innovator, not even as a person. As an object. Decorative. Foreign. Useful only as a prop. Jade stood frozen, the water pitcher trembling slightly in her grip. Pressure built behind her ribs, anger and recognition tangling into something that threatened to burst. How many times had she been spoken about, rather than to? How many times had her capabilities been dismissed, her intelligence underestimated, her humanity reduced to function? Theodore glanced at his watch, then nodded to Vincent. Let's wrap this up. Have legal pull up the final contract. No need to drag this out any longer than necessary. Vincent tapped his tablet. Section 7.4 is highlighted for her convenience. Once she initials there, we own everything. Theodore smiled broadly at Akiko. We're so pleased with this partnership. Your technology with our market reach. Perfect combination. Hiroshi translated, his voice giving nothing away. The contract appeared on Akiko's tablet. The signature line pulsed gently, waiting. Her unpolished fingertips hovered above the screen. Jade stood at the serving station, watching. The decision crystallizing within her like ice forming in still water. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. There are moments that define us, Jade. Not by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do when doing nothing would be easier. Across the room, Akiko's finger remained poised above the tablet. A beat of hesitation. Another. As if some inner voice urged caution. The room balanced on the edge of a knife. Careers, futures, legacies hanging in the tension between heartbeats. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Jade stepped forward. There comes a moment when staying silent becomes impossible. When have you reached that breaking point? Tell us your story in the comments, because speaking up changes everything, and we're building a community of people brave enough to use their voice. Jade stepped forward, then hesitated. Time seemed to slow as the full weight of her choice pressed down upon her. Interfering meant losing her job, immediately, without question. No reference. No second chance. 3 years of carefully building her resume in high-end service, erased in an instant. Her tuition payment was due Monday. $1,752 that she didn't have. Her art professor had already extended one deadline for her final project. Her roommate had covered her portion of rent last month. The precarious house of cards that was her financial existence would collapse completely. For what? For someone who would never know her name? For a billionaire who probably had armies of lawyers who could have caught this deception themselves? Akiko's finger hovered above the signature line, trembling almost imperceptibly. Jade's mind raced back to Tokyo, to her father's study overlooking the small garden. She was 14, upset after witnessing a group of older students bullying a younger child at school. She had walked away, done nothing. I couldn't have stopped them anyway, she had explained, shame burning her cheeks. Her father had set down his diplomatic papers and looked at her with gentle eyes. Your voice is your power, Jade. Not because it always changes the outcome, but because using it changes you. Save it for when it matters most. How will I know when that is? She had asked. His smile held a lifetime of choices. Your heart will tell you, and it will beat so hard you'll think it might break. Now, in the obsidian room, Jade's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat asking, "Can you afford this courage? Can you afford this truth?" But as Akiko's pen hovered above the digital signature line, a different question emerged. Can you afford to stay silent? 3 years of biting her tongue. 3 years of nodding and smiling while people spoke around her, about her, through her. 3 years of being furniture rather than human. The sound of her father's voice again, "Using it changes you." Jade's spine straightened. She set down her water pitcher with deliberate care. "Nakamura-san," she said, her voice clear and steady. The room froze. Theodore's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Vincent's head snapped up from his tablet. Hiroshi's eyes widened in shock. Jade continued in perfect, formal Japanese, bowing slightly as she spoke. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe there has been a mistranslation regarding Section 7.4 of the contract." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of disbelief so complete it seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. Jade's Japanese flowed with the natural rhythm of someone who had grown up with the language. The clause would transfer complete ownership of your neural interface patents to TechFusion without additional compensation or royalty structure. "It is not as it has been presented to you." Akiko's expression shifted from surprise to focused attention. Her finger withdrew from the tablet. Theodore recovered first, his face flushing deep crimson. "What is the meaning of this? Who do you think you?" Jade continued, addressing only Akiko. "They refer to you as decorative lobby furniture. A bonsai tree for photographs. They intend to remove you from your company within 1 year." Akiko's eyes, sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen everything all along, locked with Jade's. A current of understanding passed between them. Women who had learned to listen when others assumed they couldn't hear, to see when others believed them blind. "How dare you?" Vincent hissed, half rising from his chair. "You have no idea what you're saying." But Jade knew exactly what she was saying. For the first time in 3 years, perhaps for the first time since returning to America, she was using her full voice, not just the sounds but everything behind them. Her knowledge, her understanding, her truth. The consequences would come. The bill for this moment of courage would arrive, and it would be steep. But as Akiko slowly set down her tablet and rose to her full height, modest in inches but suddenly commanding in presence, Jade knew she couldn't have chosen differently. Some prices are worth paying. Some silences cost more than you can afford. "You have no idea what you've just done," Theodore whispered, his voice a mixture of shock and fury. The words that opened our story now echoing with their full context. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The room hung suspended in disbelief, executives frozen mid-gesture, Hiroshi staring at Jade with a complex mixture of alarm and relief, Akiko standing perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Jade's face. Then everything happened at once. "This is completely unprofessional," Vincent sputtered, jabbing his finger toward Jade. "You're fired. Immediately." Theodore grabbed his tablet, frantically tapping to close the contract. "There's been a misunderstanding. A translation error. Nothing more." Hiroshi began speaking rapidly in Japanese to Akiko, his voice low and urgent. Explanations, perhaps, or apologies. But Akiko raised one hand, silencing him with a simple gesture. The room stilled again, all eyes drawn to her as she settled her gaze on Theodore. When she spoke, it was in perfect, unaccented English. "I understood everything you've said tonight, Mr. Vance. Including your bonsai comment." Theodore's mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. You speak English? Fluently. Along with Mandarin, German, and of course, my native Japanese. Akiko's voice was calm, measured, as if discussing the weather rather than the collapse of a $700 million deal. I find it useful to observe how people behave when they believe they aren't being understood. The double doors burst open. Ryan Phillips rushed in, his face contorted with professional panic. What's happening here? Ms. Nakamura, Mr. Vance, I sincerely apologize for this interruption. He turned to Jade, his expression murderous. Washington. Out. Now. Akiko continued as if he hadn't spoken. Section 7.4 was particularly interesting. The clause your translator conveniently simplified would have stripped my company of patents I spent 15 years developing. She picked up her tablet, swiping with precise movements. The acquisition is terminated, effective immediately. My attorneys will contact yours regarding tonight's attempted fraud. Fraud. Theodore's voice cracked. That's absurd. This was a standard acquisition agreement. With non-standard deception, Akiko replied. Recorded, by the way. My tablet has been documenting this entire conversation. Vincent went pale. You can't do that. It's illegal to record without consent. In California, yes. But this contract negotiation falls under international business law, where different standards apply. Akiko collected her purse with unhurried movements. My legal team will explain the details. Ryan grabbed Jade's arm. Give me your apron and badge. You're terminated for violating guest privacy and company policy. Jade unfolded her apron with steady hands, though her heart raced. Pride and terror warred within her, the exhilaration of finally using her voice battling with the crushing reality of unemployment. Theodore had recovered enough to shift from shock to threat. You, he pointed at Jade, will never work in this city again. I'll make sure of it. And you, he turned to Akiko, can expect a countersuit for defamation and corporate espionage. Your little spy here has violated multiple confidentiality agreements. Ms. Washington is not my employee, Akiko said calmly, though her integrity is certainly worth noting. Integrity doesn't pay bills, Vincent sneered. Jade handed her badge to Ryan, her fingers trembling slightly. No, but it lets you sleep at night. Get out, Ryan hissed. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. As Jade headed toward the service door, she felt strangely light, as if speaking truth had physically unburdened her. Yet simultaneously, a new weight settled onto her chest. She'd just torpedoed a $700 million deal, lost her income, and made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in tech. Her tuition payment was still due Monday. Her career in high-end service was effectively over. But Akiko Nakamura was watching her with an expression Jade couldn't quite read. Something calculating, appraising, almost like recognition. And that would change everything. Jade stood at the service elevator, jabbing the down button with more force than necessary. The weight of what had just happened pressed against her chest, making each breath an effort. By morning, Theodore Vance would ensure her name was blacklisted at every high-end establishment in the city. Her tuition payment, $1,752, loomed like an approaching storm. 3 years of careful saving, gone in 3 minutes of courage. The elevator display remained frozen at the lobby level. Jade pressed the button again, watching her reflection in the polished metal doors, still in uniform, but no longer belonging anywhere. Behind her, the executive elevator chimed softly. Jade didn't turn. That elevator wasn't for her. Never had been. It bypassed the staff areas completely, connecting the obsidian room directly to the hotel's grand lobby. Two separate systems for two separate worlds. But something in the quality of the silence that followed made her look up. The executive elevator stood open, and within it, alone, stood Akiko Nakamura. "I believe," Akiko said quietly, "we have unfinished business, Ms. Washington." Jade blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry." Akiko held the door with one hand. "Please join me." Hesitantly, Jade stepped toward the executive elevator, this forbidden space that had never been meant for someone like her. As the doors closed, she stood awkwardly, hands clasped before her, eyes fixed on the floor numbers. "Your Japanese is exceptional," Akiko said. "Tokyo dialect, with just a touch of Kyoto influence. You lived there as a child." Jade nodded, surprised. "My father was with the diplomatic corps. We lived in Setagaya for 8 years. And now you're a server at the Pinnacle." "I was," Jade corrected, a hollow feeling spreading through her stomach. "I'm an art student at the academy. The job paid tuition." Akiko studied her with those perceptive eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "You sacrificed that job for a stranger." "For what was right," Jade said simply. The elevator descended smoothly, silently, so different from the rattling service car she usually rode. "Do you know why I pretend not to speak English in certain business settings, Ms. Washington?" Jade considered. "To observe. To see how people behave when they think you don't understand." Akiko's lips curved slightly. "Precisely. People underestimate those they consider invisible. They reveal truths they would otherwise conceal. It's a valuable strategic position." "Until it's not," Jade said. "Until it's not," Akiko agreed. "I watched you tonight. You were invisible too, by their design, not yours. Yet you saw everything, understood everything. And unlike my translator, you chose integrity over comfort." The elevator slowed as it approached the lobby. "My North American operations are expanding," Akiko continued. "I need someone who understands both Japanese and American business culture. Someone who sees what others miss. Someone unafraid to speak truth, even when silence would be easier." She turned fully toward Jade. "I need a communications director, Ms. Washington. Someone who can be my voice when I choose silence, and who can understand silence when others only hear words." Jade's heart stuttered. I don't have business experience. I'm an art student. You have observational skills, linguistic talent, and moral courage. The rest can be learned." Akiko named a salary figure that made Jade's breath catch. "Plus relocation to our San Francisco offices, health benefits, and a completion stipend for your degree." The elevator doors opened to the opulent lobby. Two worlds collided, the one Jade was leaving, and one she had never imagined entering. "Why me?" she asked, still unable to fully process what was happening. Akiko stepped out of the elevator, then turned back. "Because in that room full of powerful men, you were the only one who understood what real power is." She held out her hand. "It's not position or money or force. It's truth, spoken at exactly the right moment." Jade looked at the extended hand, this bridge between worlds, between futures. Everything would change if she took it. Nothing would remain the same. She stepped forward and clasped Akiko's hand. Sometimes the most important doors in our lives are the ones we never expected to open. Have you ever had a moment when everything changed because someone finally saw your true value? This story continues, and so does yours. Subscribe to join a community that believes in the power of finding your voice. 1 month later, Jade Washington walked through the front entrance of the Pinnacle Hotel. Not through the service door in the back alley where delivery trucks unloaded produce and laundry. Not with her head down, uniform pressed, name tag polished to a shine. But through the gleaming revolving front door, her tailored charcoal suit catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Her hair was styled in a sleek updo, no longer constrained by the tight bun required for servers. A leather portfolio tucked under one arm bore the sleek logo of Quantum Neural Technologies. The click of her heels against marble echoed with purpose, the sound of someone expected, not someone trained to be invisible. At the reception desk, Ryan Phillips was berating a young server about water spots on stemware when he glanced up and froze mid-sentence. Recognition, disbelief, and then something like fear crossed his face in rapid succession. "Ms. Washington," he managed, his voice strained. "What a surprise to see you here." Jade smiled, not the practiced, servile smile she'd worn for 3 years, but the genuine expression of someone exactly where they belonged. "Mr. Phillips, I have a 9 o'clock in the Sapphire Room. Ms. Nakamura will be arriving separately." Ryan blinked rapidly. "You're here for the Quantum Neural press conference?" "As a guest." As communications director for North American operations, Jade corrected gently. She glanced at the young server, who was staring at the floor, just as she once had. The water spots aren't her fault. The new dishwashing solution the hotel switched to leaves residue. I mentioned it in 3 separate inventory reports last year. Behind Ryan, a wall-mounted television displayed financial news. The ticker at the bottom showed TechFusion Global stock down 38%. The headline read, "CEO Theodore Vance faces board inquiry over failed acquisition and fraud allegations." Jade continued toward the elevator, the main one this time, not the service car, nodding politely to staff members who had never before met her eyes. Some recognized her, their expressions a complex mixture of confusion and awe. The Sapphire Room hummed with activity when she arrived. Journalists checked recording equipment. Photographers adjusted lighting. At the center of it all stood Akiko, reviewing notes with her team. When she spotted Jade, Akiko excused herself and walked over. They greeted each other with the easy familiarity of partners, not employer and employee. "The press release is finalized," Jade said, handing over a document. "I emphasized our commitment to keeping neural interface innovation independently owned and ethically developed." Akiko nodded. "Theodore's lawyers offered another settlement this morning. Double their previous figure. And I declined." Akiko's eyes held a glint of satisfaction. "Some things aren't for sale." Together they surveyed the room. Reporters who had once dismissed Akiko as a minor foreign player now eagerly awaited her announcement. The same technology that Theodore had tried to steal would now compete directly with his company's products. "Are you ready?" Akiko asked. Jade took a deep breath. For weeks ago, she'd been invisible in this very hotel, counting coins for tuition. Today she would help announce a $100 million American expansion for Quantum Neural, with herself at the communications helm. "More than ready," she replied. "The business world calls it asymmetric information advantage, when you know something others don't." Jade and Akiko now had a different kind of advantage. The power of being perpetually underestimated, until the moment they weren't. They stepped toward the podium together, 2 women who had transformed vulnerability into strength, silence into power, and underestimation into opportunity. 6 months later, Jade and Akiko stood outside the executive boardroom of Quantum Neural's new San Francisco headquarters. Behind the polished mahogany doors waited representatives from 5 of the world's largest tech companies, former competitors now eager to partner with the rising star of neural interface technology. Through the frosted glass panels, Jade could make out the silhouettes of waiting executives, men and women who had specifically requested her presence at this meeting. Not as a server of drinks or clearer of plates. Not as a silent observer, but as an equal voice at the table, bringing her unique perspective on cross-cultural communication and ethical technology development. Jade straightened the lapel of her designer suit, not a uniform, but a choice. The portfolio in her hands contained the presentation she had developed, her ideas, her vision for the company's future partnerships. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Your voice is your power. He had been right. But what he hadn't told her was that finding that voice was only the beginning. Learning when to use it, how to amplify it, when to lend it to others who couldn't speak. That was the true journey. Akiko turned to her, eyes bright with the mutual respect that had grown between them. Two women from different worlds, brought together by a moment of truth in a room where they were supposed to remain invisible. Are you ready to be heard? Akiko asked quietly. Jade smiled, the confidence in her expression worlds away from the cautious server who had once hugged the walls of the obsidian room. I was always ready, she replied. Now they're finally prepared to listen. Akiko nodded, understanding perfectly. Together, they pushed open the doors, not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and former waitress, but as partners. Equals. Their shoulders aligned as they crossed the threshold into the waiting room, into their future. Some voices are silenced. Others are simply waiting for the right moment to speak. At Soul Thread Stories, we believe your story matters and deserves to be told. This was just one of the thousands of untold stories happening every day. Subscribe now, because next week we're bringing you another powerful story about what happens when someone finally finds their voice. The question is, will you be here to hear it? Join our family now, because some stories can't wait to be told.